Yesterday, at a reception in Downing Street for Holocaust survivors, Prime Minister David Cameron asked, when students learn about the Holocaust 50 years from now, in 2064, what will they be viewing and what will they be learning? To answer these questions, he launched a commission yesterday, the Holocaust Commission, to examine what more can be done in support of Holocaust commemoration and education. It's a privilege that I've been asked to advise that commission, and Henry Grunwald, our Chair of Trustees here at the Holocaust Centre, is also a member of the Education Working Group. At the National Holocaust Centre here in Nottinghamshire, over 20,000 pupils come through this centre every year, yet there remains a huge amount more that can and therefore should be done. Here are the three purposes of commemoration and education about the Holocaust that I regard most highly. First, to give dignity to the victims of the Holocaust. One of the reasons that the Holocaust occurred in the first place is because there was such little respect for Jews and for the right of Jews to live in Europe. So providing dignity as a community for the victims of the Shoah means that we reject those attitudes of the 1930s and 40s, and it enables us to affirm our own humanity and express values that respects everyone's right to life and liberty. The second purpose for commemoration and for memorials, I believe, is for survivors. It acknowledges the crime publicly and the suffering, and therefore it's a contribution to justice, what we might call transitional justice, and reparation, healing in its broadest sense. The third reason and purpose of commemoration and education for me is that memory should be a warning, and it should be for education, and a warning through education. If you've been downstairs to the permanent exhibition, I'm sure most of you have, you won't have missed a large photograph of a burned out synagogue. This synagogue is on Rosenstrasse in Berlin. Last week, I met a wonderful woman in San Francisco called Rita Kuhn, and she'd grown up in Berlin. Her father was Jewish. Her mother was too, having converted to Judaism from a nominal Lutheran family. Rita lived 14 blocks from Rosenstrasse. She would walk the 4 blocks down to Kristallnacht and then all the way down Kristallnacht towards her school at the synagogue. On the morning of the 10th of November, 1938, she, as usual, made her way down Kristallnacht. But this time was different. 2 friends came the opposite direction, calling to her and told her that their beloved synagogue was burning and that the fire services were not only watching but protecting the neighbouring buildings from catching fire while the synagogue burned. And that was when Rosenstrasse synagogue became the ruin that we now display. So the question is, are we doing enough when we have our images and these artifacts to bring your stories and connect your stories and to bring all this to life as we should be doing? I think we take it for granted at the moment that you're here speaking to students that come, telling your stories, making it all personal. But as the Prime Minister said, we need to be thinking of 2064 and our responsibility to make sure that these photographs, these images, these artifacts are as personal as you make them today. But it's not just how we tell the story and what we tell. If commemoration is about a warning from history, we have to be asking ourselves the question, and how do we convey this to the children in 2064? What is it we've learned from Kristallnacht? What was happening as 11-year-old Rita walked down that street with that shattered glass and that red paint daubed on those walls and the smoke from the synagogue? What was it that the German neighbours were doing and saying? And how did that affect the dynamic in the country in terms of what the hierarchy would do next? And more importantly, how was the UK responding and other powers around Germany responding to that night that was widely reported? And if our response was too muted, were we perhaps giving a green light to the Nazis, that they could take it a step further? It's not just governments that need to learn these lessons. And through our education, we should also be asking about communities and individuals and our silence in the face of these kind of atrocities. I'm going to end with one more anecdote because in terms of hope and inspiration that we can bring to students in the future, we should ask if we're doing enough to reach in to history and explore the stories of the heroes. Rescuers were so few, but they're such an important minority. And if we want to have a safe, peaceful coexistence in the future, we need to know how to transmit those kind of values through our education. By 1943, Rita was 14 years old and she was being used as the final Jews in Germany were as forced labourers. But in 1943, they were rounded up and arrested and they were taken to a place, a street called Rosenstrasse, which has actually been a Jewish welfare centre. And they were held there while they were being processed. And what happened there was something quite incredible, in that the women started to protest, started to call back for their husbands and their children. We know the experience of the Gestapo and the SS, women on the street protesting in Berlin on behalf of Jews. What happened to them was nothing. And those men and their families, Rita was held with her father and her younger brother, was released. Now, some scholars have argued, well, maybe they were just held there for questioning and that they were going to be released anyway, and that the protest really didn't make any difference. But even if that is the case, why were they released? And the answer is this: public opinion. The Nazis were concerned about public opinion. It was going to create a very bad taste in Berlin. We kind of know what's going on over there in Poland. This is bad stuff. We're hearing this. Soldiers going backwards and forwards. We're hearing these reports. But here are families. And so they didn't let them live in freedom, but they allowed them to live as slave labourers. Now the thinking is that maybe this would last a small time while they used them for the war effort, and eventually it would catch up and they would be deported. But that period where there was this concern gave sufficient time for eventually the fall of Berlin and the survival of these men. If even the most brutal regime, probably that has ever been recorded in history, could be concerned in their capital city about what people think, how much more could our own governments and governments in other parts of the world be concerned about our voices when we raise them on behalf of those that are under threat of genocide today? So these are just a few of the questions that we need to be asking ourselves, and I'm sure you have many more questions, and please do share them. Share them here at the centre, share them with me, share them with Henry, who's sitting on the working group, and share them on the Downing Street website over the next few months. I think the consultation is open until May. Because when that generation of 2064 look back to assess how we rose to this challenge, they may first ask whether we did all we can to preserve knowledge of those times, to represent victims with respect and dignity, and to engage as wide an audience with the Holocaust as possible. But secondly, when they observe that generation of 2064, the social ills in their time, they may ask what we did to ensure that Holocaust remembrance provides not only a warning, but a tool to mitigate the danger that prejudice represents to our civilization. And the rise of extremism across the globe, including in our own continent of Europe, highlights the importance, urgency, and responsibility of the task before us to ensure that the Holocaust is properly remembered and to ask how that remembrance can best contribute to peaceful coexistence in our land and beyond.